YouTube's loading up. Good morning, YouTube. Here we go. Let's hit the recording and get into it. Hello and welcome to the Mastermind, Body, and Spirit Show. I'm your host, Matthew Belair. As you know, we're currently overcoming massive censorship. So if you want to support this show, please share episodes far and wide. Leave a review on iTunes. Share with your friends or wherever you can. You can go to mattbelair.com and become a member where all the episodes are backed up. There's some exclusive content. You can download the episodes to your iPhone, share, do whatever you want to do. But the best thing that you can do is to do 3 kind acts wherever you are in the world today. Today's guest is a licensed psychotherapist, ordained minister, and former college professor with 3 collegiate degrees. He is a soul healer and author of several best-selling books and oracle cards. He recently released his new book called Animals, Personal Tales of Encounters with Spirit Animals and the Oracle Cards Shaman's Path. Welcome to the show, Dr. Stephen Farmer.
Oh, thank you, Matt. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, this is going to be good. We're having a nice chat before we dove in here. And, you know, when I began to look at your work, it's very deep. You know, I didn't even, you know, I learned one thing and then another thing, like you're a former college professor. You know, you're a psychotherapist. You've kind of gone a little bit into shamanism. So you're all over the place. You have a vast history and a vast knowledge. So I'd love for you to just share a little bit about your background and you know, what led you to reading these books and how your story evolved.
Sure, Matt. As a shamanic practitioner and a licensed therapist, it's very interesting in my practice when I work. I work with people one-to-one. I have a mentorship program. I do workshops online, etc. Actually, we're going to have some in-person workshops coming up in the desert. Joshua Tree, me and a colleague are doing actual people where people move around and are 3-dimensional. Remember that?
Not really so much does. Over here in Canada. I can't wait.
And then, you know, beyond that, Sedona's coming up too with the Gathering of Shamans. But people can go to my website, you know, drstephenfarmer.com to find out that information. In answer to your question, in response to your question, I'll try to keep it fairly condensed because lengthy experiences. But basically, I had a very successful psychotherapy practice for many, many years. And then I started feeling that restless feeling, you know, like there's something else, you know, like just around the corner. I didn't know what it was quite. But then one thing led to another. I was introduced to shamanism through a book called Way of the Shaman by Michael Harner, who is, I think he's the guy that brought shamanism into contemporary culture. So I did a 2-day course and he was the teacher along with his assistant, and it blew me away. You know, it was one of those things I said, okay, it's sad. I could tell this was going to satisfy a deep hunger, you know, the calling. And I believe that's what happens, Matt, is that we're called to do these things, whatever our particular purpose or mission is. And it's just a matter of being awake enough to heed the call. And then second part is, well, then, you know, go for it. So I gobbled up. I asked Michael on it, and what do I do next? What do I do next? I did training after training, Celtic Shamanism. There's been a real revival in the last 30 years of shamanic practices and principles because it's earth-oriented. It's like, it's down to earth. You know, and I'm a triple earth sign astrologically, and I'm from Iowa, the Midwest, and my name is Farmer. How's that, you think? Anyway,
and all this is coming from a licensed psychotherapist, which makes it the best part of all of it.
Yeah, I love my work. I feel very blessed. I feel grateful for my work, and I followed the calling. I followed the call. I did a lot of training. Anyway, so I did publish some books as a therapist. In fact, one that's been revised and renewed is my very, very first book. And it's one of the first books on trauma and trauma recovery. Now we're hearing a lot about that, you know, and thankfully, because I think it provides a lot of answers. Anyway, so I didn't publish anything for many years, took the course, did a lot of training in shamanism, shamanic practice, and, you know, really retired my regular therapy practice to the point where I went into shamanic healing as a shamanic practitioner. I don't pretend to be a shaman. That's a That's a bigger door to walk through, so to speak, and requires, I think, several years typically of training, but also steeped in a particular indigenous tradition, typically. So, as a practitioner, I have no problem with that, shamanic practitioner. And one thing led to another, and I started writing again. And my PhD, my doctoral thesis was actually, I turned it into my first book in this genre. It's called Sacred Ceremony. And again, people can check that out on my website. And then I went on to write Power Animals Oracle cards, which are kind of like tarot, but they're user friendly. I've now have 5 decks of those and another one on the way. And these are like easy to use tools for divination, for getting messages. Anyway, so it has moved to the point now where this book, and I'm going to just flash it real quick and tell you a little about the book. It's, as you noted, Matt, animals, personal tales of encounters with spirit animals, not animals, yes, but spirit animals, another layer. And it's part of a series too. The publisher, Sacred Stories, Ariel, came up with this idea of doing a series of books on different themes with personal tales. So in this series, Matt, so interesting. It's a great concept, and it's working. The books are coming out there. My book was the first one to come out. The unique. So anyway, there's one on angels, sound. I just talked to a fellow. He's doing one on sound. What else? Ancestors, and a few more like that I think are really valuable, and people are drawn to different ones for different reasons. So the unique part of this book is I'm really not technically the author. I'm the featured author because I have contributed to the book and I've got the name, a lot of recognition, in this kind of broader field. But the really cool part of this, Matt, is that other people have contributed stories of their encounters, their experiences with spirit animals. And I've got, let's see, I think 4 or 5 other publications. I have to stop and think about it, which take up time, but that have to do with power animals, totem animals, spirit animals, specifically spirit animals, and what that means, how to contact that, how to receive messages, how to work with spirit animals, et cetera, et cetera. So there's some real gems of stories in here. And so it's not just me talking about it or writing about it. It's a number of people that I think 27 stories in here that, for instance, my daughter and my granddaughter, her daughter, they read a story a night as a bedtime tale. Isn't that cool? Anyway, so that's kind of the gist of it, Matt, is that led me to have this interview with you. So, and again, thank you for having me on the show. You got a lot of good energy. I like your energy.
Well, I appreciate that. And, you covered a lot of big topics there, like, the idea of divination or shamanic practicing and shamanism. So there's a lot of things that we can dive into. And, one of the things I'd love for you to speak on is just the idea of either, divination and the oracle cards and spirit animals, these concepts. So one of the things that I used to do for snowboarding and even like my training, it worked into animals and things like that, where, let's say we wanted a person to have a certain state of being. If they thought of themselves as a pro snowboarder or a pro athlete that already had those states of being, they could install them easily. It like acts as a catalyst to inspire, new information, new knowledge. And I'm curious if that's the inspiration of all those cards and how you use them in the divination and how you could go into spirit animals, because I worked a little bit with that for a while, where I'd take people through guided meditations and we would imagine these different things, or we would just bring up an animal and see if we could connect with its essence, and then take that in, right? Because let's say you feel like you're not strong and you're afraid, right? Like, I'm always afraid, I'm always anxious. Like, okay, let's go into a meditation. Now imagine you are a grizzly bear. You're the biggest, baddest grizzly bear there ever
Good.
was.
Yeah.
Do you feel any type of fear? Like, no. But all that is an emotional state of being, which you can encode in the body. So I'd love to hear your perspective on those ideas.
Well, that's brilliant. What you've just described is brilliant. I'm glad you're doing that sort of thing because, where to start? First off, like I said, it was out of my shamanic training that really prompted me to start writing. My intention was very clear. It's that to take aspects, principles, etc., that are common in any shamanic work throughout the world, that are in common, but take them and move them over a little bit towards the middle, so that they're accessible. Example, the first book, Sacred Ceremony. Its intention, the book's intention was to describe ceremonies for seasonal transitions, full moon, new moon, the rites of passage, through various eras that we have in our lives, etc. And yeah, it has something to do with shamanism. It's connected because that's a large part of shamanism is sacred rituals and sacred ceremonies. Then what came up was, well, what about spirit animals? That's something that's a given with any kind of shamanic work. But maybe there'd be more people, well, as it turned out, there are, in retrospect, but a lot of people might be interested in that without ever having a clue or an interest in shamanism, and that's what started the ball rolling with teaching and working with spirit animals. And I got to tell you, I really want to encourage, and that's part of my mission, if you will, is to encourage people to see animals in a different way and to understand animals, like what you described, that meditation of, okay, imagine you're a grizzly bear. Well, in a sense, you're calling on grizzly bear or the spirit, that particular species. So you actually are working in a sense with a spirit animal. There's no bear around. The physical bear is not there, but you called it an essence. I like that essence of bear that the person imagines themselves to be, so they feel strong and they're able to conquer their fear, and move through things much more readily. So a question that comes up naturally, Matt, is, okay, how do you tell if an animal is, a spirit animal? And here's the deal. When an animal shows up to you, the physical animal or a symbol of that animal, like a dream, or on a poster or something like that, when an animal shows up in an unusual way or repeatedly, there's something pretty big going on. And there's different ways to describe it, but basically that animal has been set by Great Spirit or God or Source or, whatever you want to call that force. Use the force, Luke. We'll call it the force. It doesn't matter what you call it, but I'll call it Great Spirit or God. It's like Spirit is trying to reach you in this collaborative effort to deliver a message to you. And that's a pretty big deal. Our ancestors, long ago ancestors, not mom and dad, grandma and grandpa, but our elders, of the ancestor world to which we're connected. Indigenous people, this is a given. Our long ago ancestors, operated with a very real sense of the world being alive, that we're not the biggest deal on the planet, even though we tend to think we are as humans. That we are interconnected, and that's all philosophical, but the experience of the interconnection, it's a good way to start, is to think about that connection. That tree out there, yeah, it's a tree. It also has a spirit or an essence. And not only that, but that tree can be a representative of that particular species, or specifically an oak tree or a maple tree or whatever it may be. I want that to make sense. So let me address it about animals, Matt, and then I'll pause. With animals, because they're all around us, both as ones that we're stewarding, taking care of or keeping as pets. But beyond that, there's wild animals all around, birds. You walk out the door, you're probably likely to encounter a bird within a few minutes. You might have a big dream about, let's say, fox or a fox. You might find that there is, around here in Southern California, where I'm living, crows. I had an owl. There was a period a while back, I think it was around summertime, of last year where I started hearing an owl. And I live in a fairly suburban neighborhood. I don't live out in the woods. I would like to sometimes, but I don't live out in the woods. I start singing back and forth with this owl. And not only was I singing with the owl, but that owl came to me as a representative of the spirit of all owls, or you could say the collective consciousness of all owls. So I'll say more about that later. Well, how do you figure out what the message is? But the idea there is basic. It's when an animal shows up in an unusual way and or repeatedly, whether physically or symbolically, that's a pretty big deal that's going on. And just like our ancestors long ago and indigenous people today, we're going to perceive a message from that collaborative effort of spirit bringing that animal to me in some way to say, hey, Stephen, pay attention here. There's something I want to tell you. And animals are much more readily accessible in that way.
Well, I love all that. What it reminds me of is the idea of the indigenous teachers just talking about all the relations, right? Everything being alive, everything having spirit, everything having essence, and I'm sure you learned that in the Celtic traditions too, is getting back to the earth and nature where we're moving more towards a simulated reality. I just did a podcast as on Benjamin Balderson's show, and he's calls himself a heathen or, goes with that philosophy, but it's kind of very interested. It's very to the ground and very connected to all things around. And, we're very distracted. You could have basically lions going down the street, but when you're watching football full blast or the movie and you're so engrossed in it, you're not even going to be connected to the nature outside. Well, meanwhile, if you're in like the Sahara Desert, right, you would be, or wherever, I don't know, in the Sahara or Africa or something where there's lions and all kinds of things, you need to be super alert and you're aware of all the sounds, the wind. And I've done things like night running. That was one of the recommendations from one of my elders, and I'd go through and I'd run through the forest at night, and I couldn't see for whatever reason, every time I moved to a new location, it would be there'd be no moon, so it would be so dark and it'd be so terrifying. I couldn't see even my hand in front of me sometimes, and what would happen is my ears would just basically perk up and I could hear everything going on in the forest, and somehow I didn't trip. It was kind of extraordinary just to be immersed in that and to have all of my senses fired up, and so we want to kind of engage in the senses, but engage in the essence of all of life and how it's always communicating with us, because it's either, it seems to me, and I'd be curious your thought, life is either always communicating to us something when we're conscious, when we're present, when we're aware, or it never is. And so when we learn to communicate with life and see everything as living, as interconnected, as a part of it, it's going to be a more empowering state of being. And I'd just be curious how we learn, or, with all the things that you've learned, how do we use those tools to empower ourselves in daily life? Let's say to overcome a trauma, overcome a limiting belief, or to like maybe move towards like a creation idea of something we want to, put forth or create in our life.
Well, it's this is a way of, I like your story too, of walking out at night. I had that experience in Australia one time, complete darkness, and trying to, me and some, shall we say, some blokes that I was with, a couple of guys, trying to find the car back, from where we were. It was very interesting. Like you said, your other senses go, okay, we got to pay attention. You can't see a friggin' thing. So we tune up the hearing and the sensations in our body, as to not asking, but relying on those much more. And the guidance, I think, is much needed now. It's needless to say, the things are just crazy right now. I've been jokingly say the inmates are running the asylum, and here we are. Like the convoy you mentioned, I think that's great that things like that are happening, that people are gathering together to address this situation. That sound that you hear is my dog. I'm going to go let him in real quick here. All right, pup, come on in. I knew you were going to do that. He left a while ago. That's one of our two dogs, 18-month-old Scout, who's a real punk dog, but he's cool. Anyway, so Matt, I think that with all the turmoil that's occurring in the world, and I don't know if there's been a period in the last few centuries or even beyond that, where there hasn't been some kind of turmoil. But this is really big. This is really big. Um, and people are afraid, and that fear, we are in animal bodies, first off. And what my take on this is there's something called the collective consciousness. And we may not be aware of the waves of anxiety and fear, but we feel them. We may and then we look for attribution. Okay, what's creating this fear? And there's a big, bad, evil enemy out there right now, the pandemic. And so what that has done, and also climate change, I don't know if you've seen the movie Don't Look Up, but a great movie. Disturbing, but a great movie. So there's a lot of that anxiety that I think pretty much everyone feels. And we're in animal bodies. So what does an animal do when it's in fear? Even if, and especially if there's a fear and you can't see or know the predator or what's been labeled the predator. So our instinct takes over. We do one of two things, when we're in fear. And this comes from this is about trauma also, but not so much about trauma, but just what's going on in the collective right now. And that fear can be dealt with in a couple of different ways. And that is to withdraw, try to get out of it, get away from it, escape, or fight your way out of it. And if you can't do either, if you can't escape and fighting does no good, guess what happens? Instinctively, we're monkey bodies. We collapse. And I've been aware of that. I see it myself as well to some degree, but just in observing, let's say going to the supermarket, and some people will smile at you, but it's rare. It's like everybody's kind of encased right now, in that bubble. You know what I mean? I don't know if you've witnessed that yourself.
And with the fear, I think that's a huge thing too, because there's fight, flight, but then I think there's a third one that's been added, which makes sense. And I've observed it. It's freeze. People just freeze up. And the difference with animals, when they get afraid, there's a video online that I watched when one of my friends was discussing this, and he says, an animal, when they're in fight or flight or freeze, they're going to go through, and it shows this bear fighting, and then a few minutes later you see this powerful shake, and that's his central nervous system in his body turning back on and just shaking out all of that super intense energy and emotion that was going on. Same with, deers will have their own process. Once they're safe, they'll come back down. But what humans do is they hold it perpetually, and that's where all of these things coming from the outer world, which is constant fear, fear you're gonna die of this invisible enemy, fear you're gonna die from the climate change, fear you're gonna die from an asteroid. But when we look at all of existence and all of eternity, we've always been subject to the creator or life itself. When we're supposed to die, we're going to die. So I think we need to remove that fear, and those are always projected to us by outside sources. I was like, oh, you're going to die of this, you're going to die of that. Well, you go back a few centuries and you got the Braveheart one. That's way more intense. And then you've got, samurais and all these different cultures where, intense war existed. But I think that we probably live our lives in more fear now than they did that day from these projected, almost parasites from TV and media and systems that want to basically shut down that central nervous system so you don't you don't live freely, you're not responding to a situation with power.
Yeah, I want to go back to what you said about the bear shaking, and that is part of. I did an amazing training in something called somatic experiencing, or I call it somatic therapy, basically. But 3-year training, and just everything made sense about trauma and what's going on, and that is that the body does freeze up when threatened. And it's preparation. It's not really a freeze yet, but it's a preparation. There's a sound, and everything gets quiet inside me so that I can tune into that sound. It's instinctive. But what happens again, if you can't escape and you can't fight your way out, and what you said about freeze is that's what happens is there's an energy that freezes in the body. And with repeated traumatic experiences, especially in childhood when we're vulnerable, those freeze stays in the body. I think it's fascinating because trauma, to heal it, you start with the body. You know, there's great stuff coming out right now about recovering from trauma. And we're veering a little bit from spirit animals, but that's okay. It's fascinating to me. This is an aspect of my work also, is working with trauma recovery. And so once we identify the frozen part, there's methodologies that help you unfreeze it gradually. You don't want to do it like all of a sudden, like animals do. Animals instinctively, they just shake it off, like you said. That was great comment. But we want to do it. There's other things that need to be present for someone to recover from trauma. Support systems, friends, therapists, groups, etc., like that will provide the support. I recommend creative expression, as one way to really start healing. Dance the dance of that trauma. Write a song, write a poem, about the suffering and the recovery. There's things like that. So another element of it, though, and I think this is where it comes back to spirit animals and the spirits of nature, really, but specifically spirit animals, is that by learning to be attuned to those animals, which show up in an unusual way or repeatedly over a short space of time, and also to have that point of view, just experiment with it. And I invite people to do that. Put your beliefs and disbeliefs aside. Try this out. When, let's say, owl, that's a good example. Like when we were singing back and forth to each other, yes, there was a message very distinct with that I heard right away. And when I say heard, I mean in my inner voice. And I believe it was owl spirit that was teaching me this through the behavior. I've played guitar, I've sing, I play didgeridoo, I play flute, I've written songs, etc. So music is an essential part of my makeup and what I do. I find it very healing and very helpful and fun too. Owl's message, first off, was, Stephen, sing. Get back to singing. Oh, thank you, Owl. And then when I tune in even more, not to the specific physical being owl that I couldn't see anyway, but to what's well, let me say it a different way. The owl, in a sense, becomes a representative of the species or the collective consciousness of all owls. So instead of an owl, the owl, etc., which is the physical being, it's owl spirit. So when I tuned in a little bit more, there was another message, which is being able to see in the dark, see in the darkness of other people. And that was a very strong medicine as a therapist, to be able to discern the shadows that somebody's carrying or is trying to bury in some way, to be aware of any shadows in myself. Those, excuse me, hiccups. So that's what Owl was conveying also is, hey, heads up, dude. There's something going on that's not real visible yet. And that comes from their capacity, the physical animal, to fly at night, operate at night, catch the mice and lunch and dinner, etc., during the night. Although, in spite of what we come to believe, owls do fly during the day sometimes. But basically, we think of them as the night eagle. And I think that's a pretty appropriate name for the species, owls. So those were really neat messages, And yes, I did start singing more. I started playing music more, etc. And I'm reminded in other ways through other messages that I receive, to continue doing that. It's a life positive kind of expression. Like I said, creative expression helps keep us sane, in this craziness.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a powerful story. It makes me think of when Tamarack Song was on a few episodes ago. He, has worked with indigenous elders and done a lot of, survivalist stuff and things like that, live with wolves and all kinds of wild stuff. And one of the things he talked about was nature speak, and how when he would ask his elders a question, they would tell him to go ask the deer, tell him to go ask the owl, tell him to go ask
Yeah.
the trees, go ask the rocks. And wherever we put our focus, we begin to contemplate. We don't think about our surroundings, right? Like you go and you label it in your mind, and it's like nothing. Like, have you ever contemplated what a rock is? It's kind of seems like a silly idea, but when you do that, you're starting to unwrap information that is in your environment. Or you go to nature and
True.
say you have this trauma, and then you say, okay, go ask the deer for support. When you focus on the deer, you're just getting impressions, and you're shooting your focus somewhere that you're not used to. That's natural. That is a part of creation. Where on the alternative, you could go to the digital side. You can go to these screens, although you can get good information from the screens and the television if you're looking at, helpful information online. Or you could be just distracted and kind of disengaged from spirit. And when you're disengaged, and as the Stoics call it, they call it dead time, right? You're just kind of vegged out. You're not participating. Those emotions are coming from an artificial place, not from real life. So if you're out in the middle of nature and you hear some stuff in your tent and you get afraid, that's real life scaring the crap out of you, but at least
Yeah.
it's real, and you'll probably be fine. And so when we think about these concepts of engaging with life and being like nature speak and tuning into our surroundings more, with all of the different things from the oracle cards and the several books you've wrote, and talking about ceremony, if a person is wanting to use one of these tools in a practical way, and they say, okay, I kind of dig it, but I'm going about my daily life, how do I begin to use some of these tools or incorporate these tools to help me with some of the challenges I'm having, or liberate me so I have a more fulfilling experience?
Yeah. Simplest answer is pay attention. Show up and pay attention to what's going on. I was joking with my two stepdaughters, 18 and 16, and the 18-year-old was in the kitchen just last night, doing this. And I said, wouldn't it be interesting in about 20 years from now that there'll be a lot of people walking around like this, because their necks are caught in that iPhone posture, of looking at the phone like this. And I think you made reference to that earlier, is how we get caught up, in the devices, that we have. It's such an electronic world right now that one encouragement I have is get outside. Yeah, go out. It doesn't matter. You can go in your backyard. You can go to the local park. You can go, if you got the woods or the bush nearby, you can go out there. Get outside. When in doubt, get outside. Walk barefoot if you can. I know it's cold, at certain times of the year, both northern, southern, depending. But you can also walk in leather-soled shoes, because there's something quite magical that happens, and it's been supported by science. And that is a thing called earthing. And I'm diverting here, but if you've heard of it, it's basically that when you walk barefoot or leather-soled shoes on Mother Earth, she gives freely antioxidants that clean up the oxidation that can occur from other things in your body. It's a great gift, and that's, again, a whole nother topic. We could do a show on that, but I walk barefoot a lot. On the ground, concrete works okay. If you're in the city, you can walk barefoot in the city, or again, leather sole shoes, because they don't. Rubber sole will tend to insulate, from the antioxidants. So there's a little tip right there. Walk barefoot. Get outside, though. Get outside in the natural world, and you start to touch into a deep, deep ancestral memory. Just pay attention. Show up. Show up meaning be present. I'll give you, for instance, just I live, like I said, in a fairly suburban neighborhood. There's a nice park nearby, and it's a great city to live in. I like living here, and the park's just a few blocks away. It's not far at all. So I love going out at night when there's nobody else there, and take my dog or dogs, the two dogs, for a walk there. And I got to say, Matt, beyond philosophy, beyond concepts, beyond our mental thinking, there's a place for pure experience. And that's where there's no words. I'm a writer, so I tend to narrate my experiences almost in third person. Sometimes it's funny. Oh, look at this. I can't wait to write about this. There's the stars up there, and there's Orion. Oh yeah, okay. But to get that and turn it off and just be in that state of, what a frigging miracle. to be alive. Just those moments to pause. I like to, like a teacher, a mentor of mine years ago called it awe. That's probably the only word, or wow is another one, of just pausing for a moment, looking at the trees. Look at that big, in this area, the palm tree. God, it has to be like, 25 meters up in the sky. It's a long, it's a big palm, and the wind is blowing. The leaves are rustling. And I'm not trying to interpret or get a message or anything. I'm just in pure experience. I got that message last night. Is the best I can is to find situations, or when I'm in a situation, is to really be fully present, to be in pure experience. That's hard to do. You're an intelligent man, your brain's probably working all the time, like mine. So to quiet the mind, through whatever practices we can do, and get outside in nature. There's little miracles that we overlook. I think it's miraculous to look up in the sky and go, wow, look at the moon. What's going on here? We live on this big rock here. And there's another rock, a smaller one, that's apparently going around this rock. And what a miracle that is, just to witness something like that. I think ultimately, Matt, the work that we do, I think can lead us into having those experiences. And as we accumulate those experiences, they plant themselves in our memory. So we can call on that memory. Like when I start talking about this, I could feel a rush in my body. And it was like an echo of the actual experience. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
So the body maintains not just the mental memory, but more importantly, I think the physical memory, the sensations of what it's like to experience, to see that hummingbird that flies right in front of your face, and you hear yourself going, wait a minute, I just heard a podcast with Matt, with this guy Farmer, and he was talking about this. So that's unusual. It does happen. I've heard about 3 stories of people going through this. But what else is going on aside from, oh, that's cool, a little hummingbird? And that's where we come in with spirit animals. Could it possibly be a spirit animal? And I would say, oh, yeah, definitely. So pay attention. And I can comment on what do you do? How do you get the message? What's the deal, to get the message? Or if I wake up with a big dream, I mentioned earlier, like a fox. Okay, what's the message, the symbol of the animal? If I'm out listening to, and I hear an owl, or I see an owl, fly overhead, which has happened, what's the message? So that's part 2. And that's part of what, again, I'm going to show this book because the publisher said I have to show the book, is animals. That's part of what this is in my other works about spirit animals, is how do you discern the message? So we'll get to that. It's magical. I don't know any better way to say it than it's mystical and it's magical to really operate in this way. Right.
Yeah.
That's an exclamation point right there. All right.
The dogs are always giving the message.
Stop. Get out of here. Come here. Get out. You can't do that. Come here.
I muted him. The dog wouldn't cooperate. I don't know if I can unmute him on Zoom with my power. Let's see here. Actually, he can still hear me. Steven, I muted you because you're a dog, but you're welcome to come back in. I was just going to comment on, I would love for you to talk a little bit about discerning it. Please do. And I just wanted to share a few things. The idea of like looking at life through the eyes of awe and wonder. They'll talk about looking at life through a children's eyes. And now that I have one, I see that now, and it reminds me each and every day of all these amazing things. And a friend of mine, I went to go visit a friend of mine, Julian, a couple of weeks ago, and he's telling me this hilarious story about being on mushrooms. And that's the one thing about psychedelics psychedelics is they help you remember this stuff. So he's describing this
True.
story about being in this canoe, and he's lying on the canoe and he's on mushrooms, and he's hearing the orchestra. No one's around, and he's hearing the orchestra of everything, and he's just describing in like vehement detail how the frogs carry everything together. Like he's like, the loons are the flashy ones, they come in and they're the high Beyonce sopranos, and they're saying that, and he's just describing this orchestra. And because I've had both mystical experiences through meditation and I've had psychedelic experiences, and I'm able through those, it's training to learn to tune you in. So I'm not advocating for or against those. I just know that they can be used for a very positive mean to get that touch of experience, which is available all of the time. So as he's experiencing, I'm like, bro, I want to go sit there right now and listen and fully immerse in that orchestra of nature. I'm like, I know exactly what you're saying. And as he's doing, I'm just kind of giggling to myself because it sounds so incredible. And I know exactly what he means. And you're immersive and you're a part of it. And it is miraculous and it's awe-inspiring. And we're kind of conditioned to go from, this task mindset where we're going from task to task and everything in between is unimportant, right? So we miss the whole thing. But really, life and all of these small details is 99% of it, how we walk through these daily experiences to each and every destination. It's like if you're driving from 6-hour drive, it's like, oh, none of that drive is important, right? You might have time to cultivate a relationship or do some learning or see some beautiful things along the way. But I think we're conditioned to think, we got to get to that next spot. That's where the fun is. That's where life is. But it's nowhere else along the way. It's not the boring stuff. It's not the contemplative stuff. It's not the boredom. It's not the anything else. It's just those high times. And I think the idea of immersing ourselves more in each moment and having equal appreciation for it, whatever it is, would be a more powerful perspective. And I'd love for you to touch a little bit on, how do we engage and go a little bit further with these experiences and what we're having with the animals. And you're still on mute, just so you know. So you got to click your bottom left.
There we go. Okay, sorry about that. Yeah.
Sorry.
I mean, the subjects you touch on, are all of interest to me. I find it fascinating that now people are working with psychedelics to do trauma recovery, from post-traumatic stress disorder. And that's an advent that has, I don't even know if it's legal or not, but there are people that are working with soldiers that are still suffering from PTSD, et cetera. And again, guess what? It's a plant medicine. It comes from the natural world, unlike LSD. I'm in a child of the 60s. I did my experimentation. I've done plant medicine journeys with ayahuasca and with mushrooms. And you're right, it's a fascinating way of accessing this, but I've also had some amazing experiences with breathwork, using the breath to move into that altered state of consciousness that's right here, right now. It's not somewhere off in the distance. And you can do it without any of that, as you commented. Yes, you can do that. Go into the forest or to the park. Put your feet on the earth and start breathing just real slowly. And that helps you bring yourself into presence, especially if I have a breath pattern that I've been working with. And apparently Andrew Weil is the one who developed this. A friend of mine told me, but I don't know where I came to it. But if you breathe in to a count of 4, hold it for a count of 7, and then breathe out for a count of 8. What happens on the out breath, in particularly when you do a more relaxed exhale versus when you do a more relaxed exhalation, what happens, it opens you up. You become more receptive. So I want all your listeners to give that a try. Go outside and do some of that kind of breathing and just see what happens. It's a really wonderful tool, and a reminder. I call them daily downloads. I'll write, I keep a journal and I write about what's going on, just this is happening. And then I use that breathing to go into an altered state, basically, and really tune in to what, basically the ancestors are the ones that communicate. What are they saying to me? And I just, blah, blah, write it out as to what the message is. And I got to tell you, Matt, again and again and again, they say, and they did this morning and said, breathe. Oh, yeah. Remember to breathe. So discerning the message, to shift back to that, Matt, basically, there's a couple of different ways that you can figure out the message of an animal. Let's say the examples, the hummingbird, the fox, owl, coyote, whatever animal shows up in physical form and or consciousness. I have a story about a coyote in the book, the Animals book. It's pretty fascinating about deceit in my, that he tuned me into. His message was pay attention to someone who's being deceitful. And I thought of somebody, I thought of three people and then zeroed in on one. And he basically confirmed and said, that's the one. And I had to take care of some business around the deceit. That's too long a story, but that was a wonderful message. So how did I get the message? Okay, there's, like I said, there's probably about 3 or 4 different ways. Let me tell you a couple of them. One, starting out with this, I think it's good to go ahead and pick up a book. It could be one of mine, or there's other books out there that make suggestions as to what the meaning might be or the message might be. That's one thing. You can go to the internet. That's another way. That's an easy way. Type in coyote, spirit animal, hummingbird, spirit animal, etc., etc., and just see what comes up, And what'll happen, Matt, is that as you're reading, and this has happened, I've had this happen as well. As you're reading the possible messages or meaning of one will jump out at you. I call it resonance. It'll resonate with you. Go, okay, got it. It's just that feeling of knowing. Okay, that's the message. So that's a second way. Go to the internet. A third way, Matt, is to understand the characteristics of the animal. And again, you can look up the characteristics of hummingbird, coyote, owl, etc. And out of that, you make you could say an analysis and deduce what the message is. Example would be characteristics of hummingbird. I don't mean to put you on a spot, but when you think of a hummingbird, what comes to mind? Just anything, free association.
Fun, powerful, creative, beautiful.
All right. Any of those or all of those could be the message. One thing characteristic of hummingbirds, which is unusual because there's no other bird that does this apparently, they can fly backwards. They can fly different ways. So where I go with that is another one to add to what you said is flexibility. It's a period of time that hummingbird came to me. Okay, I've got to be flexible. I've got to be able to move quickly, and I might even have to back up a little bit. And that's the metaphor from the characteristics of the bird. The fun, like you said, fun, lighten up, have some fun, maybe the message. And any of those can be, speak to me in a way that resonates. I can feel it in my body. I point to my heart because that's often the start of it. You get a connection there. Lighten up. The little birds, they're so light. I say to people, you cannot not smile when you see that little hummingbird, doing this. It's just like fun, like you said, creativity. So any of those might be the message by studying or understanding the characteristics, or but what you did, Matt, and thanks for playing. What comes to mind? What comes to mind? Just like that. And then be able to tune in onto any or all of those to see which one really clicks or resonates, or maybe they all do. And that's the message. That's the guidance, from this little tiny being that's a sales rep, for the collective consciousness of hummingbirds. So that's 3. Number 4, and this is where it gets fun. Ask the spirit of that particular animal. Here's how you do it. Coyote, what's the message? Close your eyes. And then once you've put the question out telepathically to the spirit of the coyote that showed up in the dark, listen with your ears. Pay attention to what with your eyes, what you see, and what your sensations are in your body. And the hearing could be internal, the inner voice. That's how I often get messages, Matt. It could be something that somebody comes along and says something, and I'm going, oh, that comes right after I've asked Coyote Spirit what the message is, or Owl Spirit, or Hummingbird Spirit. It could be inner voice, internal or external. It could be inner vision, the mind's eye, or it could be something I see out here. I'm directed to pay attention, or my vision goes in a certain direction, and that becomes the message or part of the message. And the third one is sensations in your body. Maybe I get a tightness in my stomach, and I hear the message, relax your gut. Or I might hear the message, pay attention to your gut feelings, your body. What's your body saying to you? So the last thing I want to say about that is often people are a little bit more likely to rely on one of those three, sensations, hearing, or vision. And when you combine it with sensations in the body and your thought processes, that adds a dimension too, intuition, which to the best of my understanding of all this, it really is a combination of sensations and your thought processes, cognitive. So those are the ways that you can start discerning what the messages are. I would suggest, start with the internet or books, but experiment, with asking the spirit animal what the message is. And I think you're going to have a lot of fun. And as I've said, we need all the guidance we can get, whether spirits of nature, archangels, ancestors, etc., but animals, they're around us all the time, symbolically or physically. So they're very accessible, and that's a convenience for what we're talking about here.
I love that. I think that's amazing. And, when we wake up and we learn to see all life communicating with us, if we're struggling with something or we want an answer to something, we can send out the prayer and say, please give me guidance on this issue. Please give me
Yep.
guidance on that. And then as the animals come in or life comes in, you sit and reflect and contemplate on what's happening. And that's going to open up the doors to perception for you to receive the answers you need or the inputs, right? I like one of the ideas that prayer is talking to God and meditation is listening, but you could also say presence would be listening, all the things that life is bringing to you. And then you contemplate and you think about them when these, sometimes they're a little bit weird things, right? And we always like kind of shrug them off, or, it's just, we're not paying attention. Oh, there's this, flock of birds, doing something really interesting. And then just take a moment to see what impressions come. And it's in that silence and learning to take a step back that you step off the hamster wheel that's just this buzz in your head that has no time to think, no time to receive
Yep.
any input from nature, spirit, God, the universe, animals, whatever that's trying to communicate. So those pauses are super necessary with the intent. And when we're learning to do those things as a way to live and operate in this realm, we're going to receive a lot more guidance because we're opening up to that guidance. We're kind of checking in. It's like if you're going on a trail map or you're on the ocean, you're constantly checking your headings and things like that. And we can do that as a process through, intention and what we put out, and then reflecting on what we receive back, and then we apply our will and choice. So, okay, now that I have this new information, I'm going to go do an action from my free will and see what else response I get and learn to kind of interact with the environment in a new way. So I think it's just a really powerful process, whichever way you want to go about it.
Yeah, well stated, Matt. I appreciate your comment, because that's true. I like what you said about putting your intention out there to receive a message. And then again, as I mentioned earlier, pay attention, show up and pay attention. See what goes on, see what happens. Look beyond the veil. The veil that we tend to, the various ways we tend to cover that or forget it, or we're a forgetful species. Let's face it. We've forgotten who we really are. I had a very wonderful man, the good fortune to work with him. I actually went in at a time in my life, one of those cycles of coming out of a period of being broken, which is sometimes I tag myself as the wounded healer. That's a phrase that came up, I think, in the 80s or something like that. And I went, oh, yeah, it makes sense. A lot of us who do the healing work, have had to experience the wounds, and the suffering. Suffering's part of the deal. But anyway, I had this wonderful man, Paul Fairweather. What a great name, too. Paul Fairweather, who, God bless him, and thank you, Paul. He once said to me in the midst of it wasn't really therapy. We just have conversations, and it was an older man, a mentor that I remember once he stopped me when I said, I can't pay you today. I have to pay you next week. And he just said, with this fierce look on his face, because he always looked kind of fierce, loving but fierce. And he said, that's okay, Stephen. I believe in you. Oh, what a blessing that was to have an elder, really believe it in me at a time of recovery. Anyway, the other piece that he said, one time he just launched, and he would have a tendency to do that. And he'd say, Stephen, all this stuff that we do, the therapy and the encounter trainings and the classes and the workshops and all that, I think it's just to help us remember who we really are. And I've always remembered that. We've forgotten who we really are. Fortunately, we have people like yourself, and I will include myself in that, and other teachers, people that are putting the word out, that there's another dimension to deal with here. And that dimension is that relatedness to all beings, that we're part of the puzzle, part of the makeup, but we're not, we think we're the dominant species, but take a look at what's happening, and a lot of it, not all of it necessarily, but are the result of 8.5 billion people living on a planet that could accommodate maybe 1 billion comfortably. So we'll see where it goes. Again, when it brings it down to individual cases, this is another reason it's important to find ways to receive guidance from spirit or God, if you prefer. It doesn't matter. The word doesn't matter. It's the meaning and the essence of that word, spirit. I like spirit or great spirit, that is everything. But Great Spirit speaks to us through intermediaries. There's some African communities that they believe you can't speak to the Creator directly. It's too much. So they speak to the ancestors as intermediaries to the Creator. And so then the ancestor conveys the message through various means, such as what we're talking about here. So yeah, say your intention, get outside. When in doubt, get outside. Get off your phone. Leave your phone. Oh my God. Leave your phone. Oh my God. I've been there too. Don't get me wrong. I'm not just saying that about other people, Oh, where's my phone? I get that instant hit. Like suddenly we become adopted by smartphones. Do we control them? Maybe. Try it. Leave your phone at home sometime. Go out for a walk. See what happens. Just watch your wiggles inside. And like I said, I've experienced it. I know what that's like. And then I override that and say, it's okay. Not the end of the world. Come on. Nothing that important is going to be going on unless it's an explosion somewhere near the house. Something like that. Anyway, I'm rattling on, but so forgive me for that. But back to the topic. I want to say something about the book again, if I may, Matt. And that is, again, I'm the featured author, which I've contributed the information like what I've been speaking about here, the front and the back pages, etc. But the bulk of that is just these, and I really honor these people that have submitted stories of actual encounters. I'll tell you one story that it was the first story in the book, really, or the second story in the book. And is by a contributor named Laura Rowley, who is, this is another aspect of working with animals, animal communicator. There are people, and I don't pretend to be, I do okay, but I don't profess to be an animal communicator. These are people that can tune into animals and get the messages directly from the animal, not the spirit animal, but the animal. And the spirit of the animal is involved, but it's much more direct in that way. Okay, the dog. Tune into the dog and you go, oh, he's hungry. He's giving you signals that he's hungry. But these people have developed this to the point where, like Laura, she's got a whole practice of animal communication. So briefly, the story, and I'm not going to ruin it for anybody who reads it because it brought tears to my eyes, is she gets called to attend to tend to a horse that was going to be euthanized. And the vet was there, the owner was there, etc. And as she tuned in, the horse had a huge tumor on it, on his body. So she tuned in, and what she heard was something very interesting and unexpected. She heard the horse communicate, "I took it from her." I took it from her? Okay, a little more. And the horse kept repeating, "I took it from her." Okay. And then she discovered from the owner of the horse, the owner, that her daughter, a 15-year-old daughter, had a brain tumor. And what they found is that the brain tumor was miraculously healed. It was gone. The horse had taken on the tumor and sacrificed his life. It makes me emotional just to recall that, body memory. The horse sacrificed his life out of his love, animal love, for this girl who was was his companion, rode her a lot, took care of him a lot, etc. And the girl was cured. That's a true story, by the way. It's not made up. It's maybe a little oblique about spirit animals, but I get the point. Is there something that was communicated between animal and human? And it was an astounding miracle. Now, that's a big miracle. That's a real big miracle. I took it from her. Isn't that an amazing story?
Yeah, wow, that's beautiful, and I think everything that you shared is just really powerful. It just summarizes again, paying attention to our world and how you also reflect. We're taught to go do it in the environment, but we're not talking. We don't do a lot of reflection. I feel like that's where we can understand ourselves a little bit more, understand our environment a little bit more, make a little bit better choices, reflect on the choices that we make that didn't have the outcomes we wanted. Also known as sometimes failures or misses, which are okay. So with the reflection comes the understanding. This has all been beautiful. I wish we had a little bit more time. Is there anything that you wish that I had asked or that you want to leave the listeners with? And make sure you tell everybody where they can find you if they want to get the book and learn more and check out some of the other stuff that you're putting out there.
Sure. It's drstephenfarmer.com. You can go to the website. And then rather going through like a lot of my publications and stuff, you can go to the website and find out there. You can purchase the book or books or oracle cards. I've got a new oracle card deck that's kind of interesting, messages from the ancestors. You can purchase any of those from my website or Amazon. It's available both in Canada, the US, and apparently internationally from what I've heard. And I think that's true. I think that, I don't think there's one single message, Matt, that I'd want to convey. I think a lot of the information that we've discussed, including your comments, I think have been really valuable as well. Back to this, pay attention, show up as much as you can, dance, sing, write poetry, do something creative, with the angst or the fear that you might be feeling, if in fact that suits you. Also, when you go to the supermarket, mask or no mask, and you purchase something, smile. Like somebody I commented about that, I said, "I can't see a smile." And she said, "Oh, I smile with my eyes." And people do. Watch, smile with the eyes, smile at them, bring a smile, a little, even though if your mask is on or off, but a little smile, I call it dolphin smile. Or Mantak Chia, a great teacher, said, "Smile as if you have a happy little secret." And it's infectious in the best sense of the word. It affects other people. Bring something into the environment that's different than what we're dealing with and what we have to face day-to-day basis. And it's crazy. It's just crazy, but let's not mingle with the craziness. If you're an activist, then be an activist. Like in support of what you described, the convoy, be an activist. If it's more about prayer, contemplation, meditation, bringing a peacefulness to the world, let that be your mission then. Now, get to know your purpose. Make one up if you're not sure. And you're going to find it's probably true, whatever you made up. Anyway, just pay attention, show up, pay attention, speak your truth, See what happens. That's my message.
I love it. Well, I really enjoyed this episode, and your website has got a lot of different things on it. So the animal side of it's just one thing, but the oracle, it's all the prompts of how we kind of understand ourselves, understand spirituality, and understand the world, and anything in that direction I feel is very valuable. So thanks so much for coming on the show. I invite everybody to check out the website, and
My
we'll
pleasure.
stay connected.
All right. Thanks, Matt. I appreciate it. Thank you. And thank you for the work you're doing in the world, too.
Oh,
Appreciate
my
it.
pleasure. I appreciate it.